welcome. My name is Kim Bodemer, and I'm the Director of Talmid of Hebrew College, your home for adult learning. And I'm excited to welcome you to today's Grow Session. Grow Sessions are designed to be opportunities for participants to gather, reflect, observe, and wrestle with topics relevant to our lives today through a Jewish lens. Hebrew College is part of a very special collaboration. We work in partnership with many different Jewish organizations on a shared campus. And we not only share space, but share ideas and resources as we strive to meet the needs of the Jewish community and beyond. So today, we're leaning into this partnership by welcoming one of our campus partners to share their wisdom. Today's Grow Session, entitled Kabbalah, Darkness and Light, Hanukkah's Season of Balanced Hope, is presented by Yaakov Ginsberg-Schreck, the Executive Director of RUACH. RUACH is the first and only Jewish movement and meditation studio in the country and inspires Jewish belonging through movement and meditation studios. I'll leave it to Yaakov to fully explain today's learning, but we'll whet your appetite by sharing this one quote. Taking the traditional Hanukkah candle blessings as our starting point, we'll explore the historical and mythic layers of miracles of our ancestors at this time of year. Through a lesser-known but fundamental Hanukkah origin story recorded in the Talmud, in which the season of Hanukkah is linked explicitly to the winter solstice, this conversation will invite reflection, warmth, and a dose of humanity around the inevitable and mysterious generative experience of winter in our lives. So a few words of introduction for Yaakov. Oh, I guess it's on the other page. Buoyed by tech study and blessed by expert mentorship, Yaakov Ginsberg-Schreck has guided RUACH's growth from a breath-focused project proposal into one of the most exciting Jewish startups in the nation. Applying his education in American studies, his experience with social movement organizations, and his belief in the healing nexus of science and spirituality, Yaakov began RUACH as a rabbinical student project here at Hebrew College. From 2020 to 2022, he worked with Hebrew College's senior leadership to design Beit Neshama, the House of Breath, the first Jewish movement and meditation studio in the country on the school's collaborative campus. And in 2023, after 4 transformative years of learning, RUACH incorporated as its own nonprofit. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I am pleased to turn it over to Yaakov as he leads us in today's learning.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you all for being here. I'm so happy to be here with you. And we'll go in a sec, but right now I'm just feeling it's winter for people who are in the Boston area. Hope you're all doing well with the cold and the dark, and we're going to try to bring some meaning out of that today. And for those of you in warmer climates, looking forward to catching up in the months ahead. So again, big thank you to the Talmid of Hebrew College team, especially to Kim and Laura. Thank you for your guidance and planning, both for this session and for all the wonderful offerings of Talmid of Hebrew College for the community. Also, thanks to Dr. Jacob Meskin, who I don't believe is on this call, but who was invaluable in providing guidance and advice for this presentation. And thanks to the RUACH team for building and operating as we're in soft launch now, preparing to really announce in the spring. So you heard it here first, the Jewish Movement and Meditation Studio. It's the first in the country, thanks to the RUACH team. And of course, thank you to all of you for being here, for making the time in your full lives to come and hear a word of seasonal Torah. I will put the presentation up and we'll go in. Okay. Today's topic is Kabbalah, Darkness and Light, Hanukkah's Season of Balanced Hope. For image credit here, as a millennial technophile, I will confess that I entered the title of this presentation into the AI image generator that's provided to nonprofits for free by the design application Canva. And this image, which I honestly find pretty lovely, popped out. We have a range of intersecting concepts here, which I hope will illuminate some of the depth of the Hanukkah story and help us kindle warmth in our own lives this winter holiday season. It's no coincidence that Jewish tradition has us light candles at the darkest time of the year. In fact, the traditional candle lighting blessings, which we may have learned at first as very young children, contain a mystical, one could say indigenously spiritual core, revealed in quiet but clear linguistic hints embedded in the text of the blessings. And I'll say now this presentation will leave some room at the end for questions. And while I won't be able to attend to the Zoom chat during the presentation, if there are any technical issues or any clarifying questions or things that come up, please send Laura a message in the chat and she will let me know as needed. Thank you, Laura, so much for that. So these hints in the blessings that we'll turn to in a moment, they point to an ancient, perhaps even prehistoric cultural practice that underlies the more well-known and relatively novel story of the Maccabees and the temple, namely the revelation and celebration of the winter solstice. Before we dive in, a word on how Kabbalah will feature in this time. Kabbalah being the Hebrew pronunciation of the word, the anglicized version of Kabbalah, which means receiving, that's used by American English speakers, is Kabbalah, the same pattern of emphasis as, for example, Madonna. Both are correct. There are two sources from classic Kabbalistic texts that we'll look at today. The first from an 18th century Italian work known as the 138 Gates of Wisdom, unpacks a verse from the biblical book of Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes, on the relationship between darkness and light. Here is the verse. I saw that there is an advantage of wisdom with respect to foolishness, as the advantage of light with respect to darkness. This is from Kohelet. I flagged the Hebrew word mean here because it holds multiple possible meanings, which I've done my best to reflect in translation with the phrase with respect to. One of these meanings, perhaps the most apparent one, would also be conveyed by the word over, as in the advantage of wisdom over foolishness, the advantage of light over darkness. This would be an entirely valid interpretation of the verse, and perhaps even a self-evident one. Light associated with wisdom is superior to the ignorant darkness of foolishness. Straightforward enough. But the word mean can also mean from, as in the advantage of wisdom from foolishness, the advantage of light from darkness. This translation would also be technically valid, but what would it mean? Here's what the 138 Gates of Wisdom has to say. I saw that there is an advantage to light, an advantage of wisdom with respect to foolishness, the advantage of light with respect to darkness. Gates of Wisdom says, to what can this verse be compared? To a sage who wishes to teach wisdom to his student. And if the student is unable to receive, which in the Hebrew is likabel, the same root kabel as Kabbalah, if the student is unable to receive the entire depth of such wisdom, he gives him enough of a picture from the wisdom, such as he is fit to receive. The picture is truthful before the entire depth of the wisdom, yet its way is brief and understandable for this student. For if the student later enters the depth of wisdom, he will find a greater advantage there from what he had known at the start, bringing back the verse as the advantage of light from darkness. In this interpretation of the verse, we are asked to imagine a teacher sharing the biblical maxim about darkness and light with a student. On the surface, the verse paints a clearly intelligible picture of light's superiority over darkness. Eventually in life, the student may enter into greater depths of wisdom, perhaps precisely by following the light, as the verse seems to endorse. Yet the depths that we enter by their nature tend to be dark. And it's only by plumbing these dark depths that a fuller understanding of wisdom emerges for the student. Where the verse's surface invites us to follow the light as opposed to darkness, its deeper meaning invites us to draw light from the darkness itself. The second Kabbalistic text, with which we'll close our time together later, evocatively imagines the divine presence speaking out of darkness. Between here and there, our animating concern will be the way the themes of darkness and light are woven into the traditional Hanukkah celebration. So by the time we reach our closing text, I hope you'll feel that its message is essentially what we already know to be true, and a poetic way of describing the experience artfully embedded in the not unmystical act of saying blessings and invoking miracles over ritual Hanukkah candles. Okay, so we're standing at a trailhead into the terrain of Hanukkah, and our entry point is the iconic, symbolic act of lighting candles. There are 3 blessings associated with Hanukkah candles. Blessed are you, and I put higher power here for the traditional Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, which many people on this call likely say, which is beautiful. Some people will say Havaya, some people will say Ruach haolam, the spirit of the world. I left higher power here to be maximally inclusive for people in the blessing experience. So fill in with this what feels natural, what feels good to you, be it the traditional formulation or one that creatively gives you space to enter. But blessed are you, higher power, who commands us to light Hanukkah candles. Blessed are you, who performs miracles for our ancestors in those days, at this time. And blessed are you, who has enlivened us, sustained us, and brought us to this time. This third blessing being the Shechechianu, which is a blessing traditionally said on arriving at an auspicious time. And during Hanukkah, it's recited only on the first night of the festival, on the night of arriving at this auspicious time. Of all the ideas we could focus on in these blessings, commandedness, miracles, and the nature of blessing itself, I want to focus first on perhaps the 2 most seemingly banal words, this time, Zman Hazeh. This is because in the Hebrew calendar, knowing when we are in the cycle of the year is truly essential to knowing how we are being invited to relate to the world around us and to our own inner experience. And relatedly, the word Zman, time, is being used here in its very technical sense, meaning time as a defined interval rather than as a seasonal impression. I'm seeing a hand, Sylvia. Is this a clarifying question? Oh, nope, no hand. Okay. Oh, it might have been the thing recognizing just a move. Okay. Zoom. Sorry about that. So time, we have Zman, time as a defined interval. As parallel examples, other 8-day festivals on the Hebrew calendar, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, are each also known as a Zman. The 8 days of Passover are traditionally called Zman Cherutenu, the time of our freedom. Shavuot is Zman Matan Toratenu, the Zman of the gift of our Torah, and Sukkot is Zman Simchatenu, the Zman of our joy. Hanukkah, while also an 8-day Zman, doesn't have a similar popular epithet, which begs the question, what defines the Zman of Hanukkah? But to dig a little bit deeper into this question, I'm going to share a story. And it comes from the version of the Talmud produced in the Babylonian diaspora, or the Babylonian Talmud as it's known, the Bavli. And as you may already know, there's another version of the Talmud, what's called the Jerusalem Talmud or the Yerushalmi, produced in the Holy Land at around the same time. And while the Bavli is significantly more widely referenced and studied, both versions of the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, are considered equally authoritative among scholars. This story takes place soon after the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, and it offers a seasonal origin story for the holiday that will come to be known as Hanukkah. Digging into the question of what is this time that we're being brought to, the Talmud says, when Adam, the first human, saw that the days were becoming shorter and shorter, he said, woe to me! Perhaps because I sinned by eating the forbidden fruit, the world is darkening around me and returning to a state of chaos and void. And this is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven, when God said, and to dust you shall return. He arose and spent 8 days in fasting and prayer. Once he saw that the winter solstice arrived, and he saw that the days were getting longer and longer, he said, this is the way of the world. He went and made a festival for 8 days. He established them for the sake of heaven. So to note that the challenges we're facing in the world today can't be entirely attributed to seasonal darkness might be a slight understatement. At the same time, we know that the seasons play a role in how we feel on a day-to-day basis. For those of us living at Boston's latitude, the sun is setting around 4:15 now, and it's cold. In a matter of days, though, the sun will start setting later and later, guaranteed. And then before long, really in just half the time that's passed between summer and now, it will be spring no matter what. And we'll pack our winter clothes away and enjoy the air on our skin and feel like we really deserve it because we made it through winter. None of this is a metaphor. It's our reality. But as meaning-making beings, we have the opportunity, or perhaps the innate tendency, to relate these natural phenomena to our deeper sense of the world and thereby grow in wisdom and understanding. Adam's first instinct in the story, as the world darkens around him, is to blame himself. This is my punishment, he thinks, for eating from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. Of course, the reality is that what's happening has nothing to do with him. It's entirely in the hands of higher natural forces. This story is importantly not a political account of Hanukkah's origins. That comes later with the Maccabees. But I can't help bring Adam's inner turmoil to bear on our present lives. Where the discourse on the American political left, for example, has included a lot of self-flagellation. And while it seems fair enough to believe that mistakes have been made, and while honest self-reflection is a tool for growth, the story of Adam invites us to separate our own mistakes and misjudgments from encroaching, chilling forces. Winter brings enough challenges as it is. No need to compound those challenges by beating ourselves up for their existence. The world gets dark sometimes, and even with our mistakes, this is not our fault. And even if darkness isn't our fault, we still want brighter days. And the inevitability of literally brighter days on the horizon is not always a balm for tough historical circumstances. That's where I personally take solace from another word in the Hebrew blessings, a word that underlies Adam's sense of joy at the self-renewing way of the world, at what he sees to be woven into the fabric of creation, the return of the light. And that is the word miracles in the blessing, the word nisim. We bless God who performed miracles for our ancestors in those days at this time. What is a miracle? What does it mean to realistically hope for a miracle? I'll pause the screen share here to offer some brief historical and interpretive framing that I personally find useful for entertaining notions of the, quote, miraculous. Share here. Okay. In the popular Hanukkah story of the Jewish people reclaiming our sacred temple, the miracle is that a small quantity of oil, we're told, lasts for 8 days, for longer than physically possible, right? So these two parallel miracles are miracles of renewed light in a place of darkness, whether seasonal or rededicating the temple. And we here have two different modes of the miraculous, which I think is really important, these two layers of miracle. Because unlike the winter solstice account, whose miracle unfolds by the will of higher forces, in the narrative of reclaiming the temple, the miracle crucially does depend on human action to take place. The Jewish people reclaim the temple through organization and motivation. They restore right political order, and God endorses these actions with a heavenly sign, the oil generating light for longer than physically possible. And this account of Hanukkah, by the way, is also invoked in the Babylonian Talmud. Both are in the Talmud. What do we make of this physics-defying miracle? Are we being asked to believe by our ancestors that the oil really empirically lasted for 8 days? Because if we take physics-defying accounts of miracles in ancient Jewish texts literally, then we're left with a version of history in which the laws of nature used to be malleable, used to be able to just bend, snap, change, where oil could last longer than possible, And, for example, in the Torah with the Egyptians in pursuit, the force of the wind could literally split the sea. We used to live in one paradigm of physical reality, and now somehow we're in a different, disenchanted world. But if we read these stories in their originating literary contexts, I find that they make a great deal more sense and are a great deal more inspiring and real feeling as examples of what we today might call magical realism or myth. Read this way, a very different sense of miracle emerges. In this view, the miracle of reclaiming the temple is the miracle of collective human action to change the course of our own history. And we preserve this miracle and transmit it by encoding it meaningfully into myth. A dose of magical realism in the story makes it instantly memorable and powerful. It helps us conjure at our vast historical remove the very real awe and wonder and gratitude our living, breathing ancestors actually felt in those days. And for longevity, this form of miracle captures the imagination of kids in every generation, allowing the story to be preserved lador vador from generation to generation. By the narrative mechanism of miracle, the story's essential truth is crystallized into a symbolic climax. The political order transformed, the light returns, and lasts far longer than we had once dared to dream possible. Our stories, in other words, let us bend the laws of nature in order to reflect and inspire the sense of wonder that can come with sweeping historical change. But what of the fact, and I'll say sometimes wonder does not come with sweeping historical change, but in the case of the story, that's where we get the miracle when it's change that feels liberating that we didn't dare to imagine. But what of the fact that the Hanukkah blessings seem to reference two distinct miracles? Seem two stories, two miracles. Personally, I find it striking that the 8 days of the Hanukkah temple story overlap with the 8 days of the winter solstice story in the Talmud. Given the thematic resonance, the overlap might feel entirely natural, but still the timing is a coincidence, one that I think is worth prodding a bit deeper to see if meaning emerges. And I don't mean to be a skeptic here. It's absolutely certainly possible that the temple was rededicated on the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev, around the Hebrew date for the winter solstice, as is stated in the books of the Maccabees, the date also cited by Josephus in Judean antiquities. In this telling, the temple happened to be reclaimed at the winter solstice, with seasonal themes of darkness and renewed light as a fortunate backdrop. In this account, temple history and seasonal astronomy luckily align to produce an orientation of hope and of receptivity to change. I'll say, and I think this comes out in a good and hopeful and meaningful place, that there's real reason to question the version of sheer coincidence. We know the winter solstice was embedded in human and Israelite consciousness long before we reclaimed the temple. While we can't know for certain, I'd submit that it is at a minimum certainly possible with intriguing implications that the reclamation of the temple happened at a different time of the year and was memorialized through being associated with the return of the sun's light. And if this sounds like wild, freeform speculation, I want to consider the Jewish holiday of Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the summer month of Av. On this day, it is said, both the first temple and the second temple of Jerusalem were destroyed, hundreds of years apart. And the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans was defeated. And all the way back in the Torah, the 9th of Av is the day that the spies brought back their ruinous report of the Holy Land. Is it possible, technically, that all these events really occurred on the 9th of Av? Sure. Yes. But we know the practice of history through the study of historiography, the field that studies the practice of history, that it worked differently in antiquity across cultures, and it was not considered verboten, the way it is for historians today, to bend empirical fact to fit deeper narrative truths. The 9th of Av is a sacred day of collective grief and mourning for the unresolved tragedies of Jewish history. And if those tragedies were in actuality a bit more dispersed throughout the year, I know I'm glad they were consolidated into one powerful symbolic day of commemoration. Another example from a different tradition is Christmas. While it's hard to definitively prove that the historical figure of Jesus was not actually born on December 25th, Christian scholarship itself has doubts on this understanding, to say the least. One accepted view is that December 25th was chosen by the early church for its proximity to, of all things, the winter solstice. I'll quote the Encyclopedia Britannica here, which says the Church of Rome began formally celebrating Christmas on December 25th in the year 336, during the reign of Emperor Constantine. As Constantine had made Christianity the effective religion of the empire, some have speculated that choosing this date had the political move of weakening the established pagan celebrations. Previously, the Roman Empire celebrated the rebirth of the unconquered sun, S-U-N, unconquered sun, a holiday called Sol Invictus, solstice on December 25th. This holiday not only marked the return of longer days after the winter solstice, but also followed a popular Roman festival during which people feasted and exchanged gifts. Still quoting, the date of December 25th was not widely accepted for Jesus' birth in the Eastern Empire for another half century. So when it comes to Hanukkah, again, certainly possible the temple was literally reclaimed on the 25th of Kislev, though even Josephus's timeline contradicts itself by 6 months at a different place in the text. It's also possible that the rededication ceremony was timed intentionally to coincide with the return of the light, or that the dates were massaged in the historical record to fit the frame, the cosmic frame, of the miracle of light. And while we can't know for certain which possibility is empirically true, whichever reality we take as most likely, or possibilities we take, the overlap of temple dedication and the winter solstice brings us back to the Hanukkah blessings and the notion of miracles at this time, at Zman Hazeh, this time of year. Because I'm claiming such a tight nexus between Hanukkah and the winter solstice, I want to explain what I mean by saying that the festival definitively marks the solstice. Because, and this is where when I shared this with my parents a month ago, they very intelligently brought up, but Hanukkah isn't always on the solstice. So, for those of us who live by the Gregorian calendar, which I'd assume is all of us, you would be perfectly justified in objecting that Hanukkah does not, parents said, actually overlap reliably with the winter solstice. There is a day each year with the least amount of daylight. And in a 365-day standard year, the solstice takes place annually on December 21st or 22nd. Hanukkah, being attached to the Hebrew calendar, where each month is a lunar cycle, always takes place in the last days of the month of Kislev and the beginning of the following month, a period that sometimes, but not always, overlaps with the shortest day of the year. This year, for example, Hanukkah starts on December 25th. So when Jewish tradition insists that Hanukkah does take place each year on the solstice, it must be using a slightly different method to define the solstice, which in fact it is. And because it's crucial to my thesis that Hanukkah consciously takes place at the darkest time of year, I thank you in advance now for indulging a brief foray into the shape of the Hebrew year and how it differs from Gregorian time. I'll go back to the screen share to share some images. I hope we'll make this fun. Stimulating. So here's the Gregorian year. For anyone who's on this call who's listening but has a screen handy, these next few slides would be a good time to have the visual aid. And if you don't have the visual possibility handy, the main ideas will come through in the words. So here on the screen is the Gregorian calendar. As you'll see, I've divided it into the classic quarters, beginning with January 1st at the bottom, New Year's Day. The solstices and equinoxes taking place at 3-month intervals, where he says December 21st, March 21st, June 21st, September 21st. Roughly, these solstices and equinoxes roughly correspond to the start of the month quarterly milestones of the year, January 1st, April 1st, July 1st, October 1st. The winter equivalent to the night of the year. Excuse me, I skipped a sentence. I have winter at the bottom. I have winter at the bottom and spring on the right-hand side, etc., to correspond with the movement of darkness and light over the year. The winter, which I will argue is equivalent to the night of the year, the darkest time of year, yields to spring, when daylight breaks with the equinox. The daylight grows to its summer peak and fades in the west of autumn before sinking down to winter's depth. And actually in Israelite time with the circular aspect is known, the circle, as the four winds, the Arba Ruchot, corresponding to the four directions. And we move through them in a circle over the course of the year. So if it feels counterintuitive to read the procession of time counterclockwise like this, with a sense of going from right to left, that is perfectly fair. And I felt the same way. But also I had to admit in my own learning, this is a product of cultural conditioning, this preference. It's true that clocks' hands move clockwise, but the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, generating a pattern of darkness and light that maps smoothly and very informatively for pattern and meaning making from the scale of the day to the scale of the year. In Hebrew consciousness, the right to left progression of things is essential. Right? It's the language, the direction that Hebrew is read in, right to left, and it's also the direction in which the moon, which is our primary luminary for timekeeping, fills out from a crescent into a full moon, right to left, and also right to left is the direction from which the moon's dark side grows until the moon disappears again from the sky. Tracking time from right to left is really deeply woven into Hebrew cosmology. So while Gregorian time defines the winter solstice only with respect to the sun, it's totally valid, Hebrew time includes the moon in its measurements. When the night sky is emptiest of moon, closest to the shortest day. Say that again. When the night sky is emptiest of moon, closest to the shortest day. When the cycle of day and night, that is, produce the greatest combined darkness. Cycle of day and night, greatest darkness, least moon, least sun, that is the winter solstice. So here is the equivalent Hebrew cycle of the year. Again, 4 quarters of 3 months each, winter darkness at the bottom, rising into spring on the right, into summer, fading with fall, Rosh Hashanah, the new year at the beginning of Tishrei. 4 quarters, 3 months each. In this case, each month is a lunar cycle, which makes it easy to represent the 3 moons or months of each quarter with these small white circles. There's a blue moon you might see, I'll put my arrow next to it, in the 2nd quarter here, because instead of a leap day, the Hebrew calendar employs a leap month periodically. And if I'm just nerding out over Hebrew time, it'll get really back to Hanukkah soon. And if you're enjoying this, yay. I just love that there's a leap month. There are different ways of keeping time. A leap month periodically in order to keep the lunar year relatively indexed to the solar year and to the agricultural rhythms that underlie so many Jewish holidays. In years with a leap month, this is where it falls in the cycle. We have 2 months of Adar, 2 moons of Adar. Now, as far back as antiquity, these quarters are called tekufot. Each one is a tekufah, or a season. And their distinctive properties are so great that it's even said in Bereshit Rabbah, that the earth itself goes by a different name in each quarter. Each individual tekufah is named for its opening month. Tekufat Tevet, first month of the Tekufah is Tevet. I can't help but make a quick side note here about Rosh Hashanah, or Tekufat Tishrei, because as you can see, the 1st of Tishrei is like the 1st of January. Both are days that mark the beginning of a new year, as well as the beginning of a new quarter. The start of a new quarter might not be a huge deal in Gregorian time, outside of accounting offices. But in Hebrew time, it's hard to emphasize just how much the start of a new tekufah marks a shift in experience. It is very significant that the holiday of Hanukkah, whose timing appears from the Gregorian calendar to shift from year to year, occurs at a stable, highly fixed time in the Hebrew calendar. Hanukkah always, if we look at the bottom of this circle, this point of Tekufat Tevet, the start of Tevet, the move from Tekufat Tishrei into Tekufat Tevet, changing this inflection point. Hanukkah always, always covers this point of the year, the critical point that marks the turn in the circle. So zooming in on this bottom point of the circle, these candles represent the 8 nights of Hanukkah and the dates when we light candles. You can see that these 8 days always bridge us across this axis, across this low point. Excuse me. And of all the Jewish holidays on the calendar, of all the Jewish holidays on the calendar, Hanukkah is unique in bridging us from one tekufah to another, from one quarter to another. No other holiday does this. And this distinction, this unique moment, is central to the holiday's meaning. As the story from the Bavli says, I'll go back to the story. This is the bold part of the story that we've seen it earlier, that once Adam saw that the winter solstice arrived, and he saw that the days of the world were getting longer and longer, he said, "This is the way of the world." And he went and made a festival for 8 days. And those words in brackets, Tekufat Tevet, those are the words used in the story, in the Hebrew. For anyone who's paying really close attention and wondering why Tekufat Tevet is the name for the day of the winter solstice, because we talked about it as being the quarter, that's because the words refer to the entirety of the quarter as well as to the first day of the quarter, which is in this case, the solstice day. And based on this Talmudic narrative and whole thing about the image of the year and the circle of the year, we're back in the story. And if you take one thing away from the story, please let it be that whether or not Hanukkah overlaps with December 21st, the 8-day festival consciously, intelligibly frames the Israelite winter solstice. Tekufat Tevet happens during Hanukkah. The winter solstice happens during Hanukkah. Okay, detour into the shape of the Hebrew year complete. Let's the share again. Because now that we've established the seasonal solstice awareness, pausing the screen to talk about now that we've established the seasonal solstice awareness underlying the political and historical dimensions of Hanukkah as we know it, we're now in a position to more fully hear the resonance between the holiday's layers of miracle. Talked about the miracle that transcends human action and the miracle that takes place because of human action. So what does the light do at this time of year? In this story from the Bavli, miraculously, no matter what, it returns. In the story of our ancestors reclaiming the temple, we have this idea that lighting the candles is a way of our aligning both our homes and our political imaginations with the shifting cosmos. The miracle of light's return and of reclaiming the temple are both mirrored in the menorah, in the Hanukkah, resting on the windowsill with glowing candles illuminated by our hands. Miracles are woven into this time of year, into this Zman. So now in the spirit of balanced hope, it's time to flip the coin and move from talking about the light and its return to exploring the theme of darkness. This is the central paradox of this presentation, and when I talk about paradox, I can't help but give thanks to Rabbi President Sharon Cohen-Anisfeld, who is a great teacher of paradox and holding balance by holding two sides of a coin. So now we're turning from the light to the darkness. Because while there's a very real sense in which the binary of light and dark maps onto other binaries like good and bad, wisdom and foolishness, or pleasure and pain, there can also be tremendous value in darkness. And I think part of the teaching of the winter solstice story from the Talmud is that becoming comfortable with darkness, even frankly, befriending darkness, is a key way of opening ourselves to transformation. At this darkest time of the year, our annual Torah reading gives us Joseph the Dreamer, and the stars are most enduringly visible in the sky, night after night, when the clouds are cleared. We know in our bones that there is wisdom to be drawn from this season, as is true of all seasons. To echo the Kabbalistic Gates of Wisdom text we opened with, and its elevation of wisdom drawn from darkness, we have to ask, what does darkness, literal or allegorical, come to teach? We'll turn briefly to two core meanings that Jewish scripture reads out of darkness, and then turn back to see how these meanings fit the holiday at hand. In the text tradition, darkness first appears in the account of creation, where it actually precedes light. Before God says, "Let there be light," we are told there is water and there is darkness. So I'll put the screen share back on and we'll look at the beginning of Genesis. Opening of Genesis. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness on the surface of the deep, and God's wind sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and called the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. I'm going to turn us here to Rashi, who on the phrase unformed and void in verse 2, describing a pre-light state of the world, says that this phrase tohu vavohu signifies astonishment and amazement. For a person would have been astonished, tohe, and amazed at the emptiness, bohu, within it. Facing a primordial, unformed world of water and darkness, Rashi conjures a sense of astonishment and amazement. From a light-centric perspective, or one that fears darkness, the unformed, overt darkness of the world in verses 1 and 2 represents horrific primordial chaos. But I don't think that's actually what Rashi sees. Rather, the darkness of tohu vavohu is the darkness of sheer potential, so amazingly indefinable as to be rendered in childlike rhyme with delighted astonishment. The opening verses of creation paint a portrait of a world not in desolation, but in utero. And if it seems, going back to the verses for a moment, that God separated the light from the darkness because the light is good and the darkness is not good, which would be an intuitive reading, that runs right into a problem in the next verse, when God calls the light day and the darkness night. Because it's only through a passage of night that we have a day of creation. And I don't think we want to say or would believe that a full half of the daily rhythm of time is bad. Rather, what we have here is the revelation of light, the appearance of its goodness, its distinction from darkness, and then when it's distinct from darkness, we can see darkness on its own terms as night, and its deeper value begins to emerge. This initial darkness of creation as the darkness of a womb is echoed on the human scale at the beginning of the next book, the book of Exodus, when a mother gives birth to a child who will redeem a nation. It says, "The woman conceived and bore a son, and she saw that he was good." At the risk of stating the obvious, this formulation of seeing the child as good directly recalls God's refrain from Genesis when God sees creation as good, vayar ki tov. In fact, after the phrase is used precisely 7 times in the opening account of creation, which is a very symbolically significant number in Hebrew literary craft, it does not appear again. We don't hear this vayar ki tov until a human mother gives birth to a child at the dawn of liberation. The echo to Genesis is so unambiguous that I can't help but wonder if its striking implication that a mother giving birth is embodying the image of God from the creation myth was too uncomfortable for some later translators who render the English as "she saw how beautiful he was," not as how good he was. But however naturally our concepts of beauty and goodness intersect, these are two different words, two different verbal roots. And by attempting to ignore or suppress the illusion, the act of avoidance confirms just how powerful it is. If a mother sees her newborn child as good, and if the God of creation is to be read less as a wand-waving magician than as the mother giving birth to the universe, seeing creation as good, there's a lot for us to consider about what the Torah might be saying about society and divinity and the process of creation, beyond the significance of darkness and light. But for this time, because about 8 or so more minutes before I'll do leave time for questions, I want to stick with the significance of darkness and light. And I have to confess here, when I practiced this, it fit in 45 minutes. I have about 8 pages single-spaced here. So this has been a chance to slow down and zoom in. So what I'm going to do here is do an overview of these last kinds of darkness and light in the Torah, and then bring us back to Hanukkah to close. So we have this darkness as generative, this darkness as part of birth. We also have darkness as destructive, most famously in the plague in Egypt, where God says to Moses, stretch out your arm toward the heaven that there may be darkness. And many of us may know the story, and if the text is familiar, these slides will be sent out afterwards, but we know darkness comes as a very powerful plague, a darkness that can be touched. The rabbis of the Midrash are so troubled by this destructive darkness that they ask, where does this darkness from heaven come from? There are two rabbis, Rabbi Judah and Rabbi Nehemiah, who discuss it. Rabbi Judah says it comes from above, citing a verse from Psalms that says, God made darkness his covering, his canopy around him. Rabbi Nehemiah says from the darkness of the netherworld, as it is said, a land of darkness, like the darkness of the shadow of death, without any order, and where illumination is as darkness. Bringing a passage from Job, the book of Job, from before its hero encounters the divine presence, from where everything just feels like the netherworld. So I want to look at this darkness that's destructive, that is a plague, that still comes from above, which may not be a way that we feel ready to encounter darkness in our own lives. There may be places where it's just too raw, too immediate, and seems to mock the idea of redemptive value. What are you talking about? This is darkness from above. So for those places, we follow Rabbi Nehemiah. But for there are places where it seems like there might be something to teach us. We have this verse from Psalms, where God made darkness his covering, his canopy around him, water darkness, dense clouds of sky. Excuse me. So we have now categories of darkness presented to us in the Torah. There's creative darkness that gives rise to the universe, and there's destructive darkness, the darkness of the plagues, which can be experienced sometimes in our lives as a curse from below, as unpalatable, or somehow as a blessing from above. For me, episodes of destructive darkness seem to begin with an awful sinking feeling of darkness from below. When I've been lucky, though, the pain of that darkness can yield a higher perspective through life lessons. To share one example, in hope of conjuring memories of possibly hard-earned growth that we've all experienced. When I was a teenager, I suffered a physical challenge that led to multiple hospitalizations and surgeries in the span of a few years. In my 20s, I began a movement practice with a focus on the breath, which helped me understand the deeper causes behind what had happened. In time, that focus on the breath merged with my Jewish practice, when I learned that the words breath and spirit are the same in Hebrew. And while I wouldn't wish such an initially destabilizing and scary learning process on anyone, it does feel now like that darkness came from a higher place. Because today, when I recall that difficult chapter, I'm aware of how it informs my current passion for building Jewish movement and meditation studios. But of course, in the spirit of the Midrash, I want to honor the debate by leaving the question open-ended, because the answer may be different for different people here, or perhaps even for us as individuals over time. I do want to note that in that verse about darkness being God's covering, God's canopy, it literally uses the word sukkah, and it says water darkness, dense clouds of sky, that the darkness from above becomes the very tangible darkness here of thick clouds. This kind of darkness can certainly be fearsome. Storms are capable of vast destruction, but it is also a natural darkness, a darkness that contributes through its abundant release of water to the propagation of life. It's a darkness that is so life-affirming that the verse refers to it as God's own shelter. And for a fuller treatment of rainwater as a source of both destruction and blessing, and ultimately, like the liberatory plagues, as difficult it is to sit with, as a living metaphor for a vision, put the plagues aside, for rain. Rain becomes God's vision of justice in a book by Hebrew College faculty member Dr. Devorah Steinmetz, Why Rain Comes from Above, Explorations in Religious Imagination, published this year. Highly recommend Rain, rain storms. It's an instantiation of God's justice, nourishing people of all social classes. So, two kinds of darkness. And at this time of year, when we receive from our tradition two modes of the miraculous, the miracle that transcends human action and the miracle that takes place from human action, I want us to return to the blessings that join these two modes of miracle in this time, in Zman Hazeh. The miracle of the solstice would happen whether or not we were here. The miracle of the oil lasting 8 days, those 8 days of the Talmudic story bringing light, they depend on the human drive to change the world. So, where darkness feels beyond the bound of redemptive interpretation, I believe this is where we ask for a miracle. So, I'll bring us to close with our promised closing Kabbalistic text, which says that when she, the Shekhinah, this is from Tikkunei HaZohar, a 14th century index to the Zohar, that's a Kabbalistic text in its own right. When she, the Shekhinah, our indwelling divine presence, is distant from the king, the sovereign power of the universe, it is stated of the king, I shall clothe the heavens with darkness. And the Shekhinah, the indwelling divine presence, says, do not look at me, for I am blackened. In other words, there's a disconnect represented in the text between our indwelling sense of what's sacred versus what we see happening out there in the world. In this place of distance, both the heavens and our innermost sense of self appear dark. It continues that people who are foolish look only at the garment, the darkness of heavens, and others look only at the body, which is hiding the inner spark. But the wise one looks within. For at that time, when he becomes enclothed in these garments of darkness, it is stated of him, and God said, I shall conceal my face from them. But after God strips off the garments of darkness through the plague of darkness in Egypt, which is cited earlier in the text, all the children will point to him with a finger, as it is written, he made darkness his covering, the verse we've seen in the psalm. And because of this, Daniel said, he knows what is in darkness, and light resides with him. And at that time, when he is in the darkness, he is enclothed in tohu vavohu, and in darkness and in depth. This text recalls the Kabbalistic text we started with from the Gates of Wisdom that says, for if the student later enters the depth of wisdom, he will find a greater advantage there from what he had known at the start, as the advantage of light from darkness. At the depths of our experience, these Kabbalistic texts are saying, Hanukkah is saying, the winter solstice is saying, darkness yields a profoundly potent kind of light. This perspective was conjured by its Kabbalistic source to illuminate a verse from Kohelet, that biblical book whose surface disposition of seen-it-all futility yields through attentive reading the depths of Solomon's wisdom. Here's the verse we started with. I saw there an advantage of wisdom born from darkness, as the advantage of wisdom born from foolishness, as the advantage of light born from darkness. Light born from darkness in the solstice season. So my prayer for us this Hanukkah season, when the world feels so troubled for so many, is that we find ourselves equipped to follow Adam's footsteps into the darkest depth of the year, with a sense of mystery and receptivity, with the kind of hope drawn from the memories of the dark chapters we've survived, endured, maybe even triumphed over in our lives to date, as well as from the chapters of light whose gifts roll right off the tongue. As we stand at the threshold of the winter solstice, may this year's Hanukkah candles grant us a small respite where the darkness feels too heavy, where it just feels like Rabbi Nehemiah would say in the Midrash, like this is darkness from below. May Hanukkah bring us a respite there. May it also bring us insight into the depths of winter's wisdom, where the darkness feels instructive. Rabbi Judah, where the darkness feels like it can be seen as coming from above. Depths of winter's wisdom. And for all of us, may the winter solstice grant us the grace of balance in our cosmic, quotidian turn after 6 months of shorter and shorter days to, at long last, the renewed growth of the light. Chag Urim Sameach, wishing you and yours a joyful festival of lights. Happy Hanukkah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Yaakov. Um, I think you've given all of us a lot to think about. Unfortunately, I don't think we have time to entertain questions, but that's okay. Um, I don't know if you're open to if people have specific questions, if they can reach out to you by
Absolutely.
email. Okay, so we'll include that in our follow-up email to everyone. But I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for joining for this wonderful presentation, and to all of you for joining us today. I want to let you know that Yaakov and RUACH will be partnering with Talmid of Hebrew College to offer a course this spring. So watch for those details. And we have year-round opportunities to learn. So not only in the winter solstice, but all through the spring and the summer as well. Our next Grow session will feature Jan Darsa. I'm going to put it in the chat right now, doing a presentation on the story of Israel and modern Zionism. And there's a link there. You'll also get this in your follow-up email. And the last thing I want to just say is we do have some intercession courses that will start in January and more that will begin in February. So I'm going to put that also in the chat and invite you to continue to be in relationship with us. And we wish all of you a very happy, light-filled Hanukkah and a very happy and healthy new year. And yes, January 8th will be recorded. We always record them. All you have to do is register and then we will send it out. Okay.
Kim,
Happy New Year, everybody. Yes, Elaine.
Kim, if I could just add one thing. First of all, thank you so much, Yaakov. It was very enlightening and it was a wonderful presentation. But I also wanted to bring your attention. I think you all know who Josh Jacobson is. And he has Hanukkah happening every year on Christmas Eve at Temple Emmanuel. And it's a wonderful take. If you are around and local, drop by, get a ticket at the door. But it's the most fascinating, wonderful program every year Hanukkah happens. Enjoy.
That's great. And it sounds like it brings more light in through song. And Josh Jacobson is one of our campus partners too. It's part of Zamir Chorale.
Right. And I
Okay.
just finished a 6-week course with him as well. And I was done New England, the North American Jewish Choral Festival with him. And he's
Nice.
amazing. Just